Has this ever happened to you? You build an emergency fund and then before you know it, you're rebuilding it again. You start to wonder things like, why does this keep happening? Am I saving the wrong way? And how much is actually enough so this stops? If that cycle feels familiar, you're not doing anything wrong. Rebuilding once makes sense. Rebuilding over and over again doesn't. If you're new here, welcome. I'm in my 40s building financial independence after paying off a lot of debt and figuring out what finally worked for me. This channel is for late starters who want clarity, steady progress, and a realistic path to financial independence, and who want help to build their own financial independence with somebody who's actually doing it. And in this video, I'm going to show you why that rebuilding of your emergency fund reset keeps happening, why saving harder doesn't solve it, and how to figure out how much is enough so you can stop rebuilding. I've been through this cycle before. Early on, I would stack up on how much money I think I need in order to call it an emergency fund. Then when something would happen, I would pull from my emergency fund and then it would drop back down and I'd have to rebuild it again. And I just assumed that's how it was. And I would have to rebuild over and over again, just thinking I got to try harder next time. But after paying off a lot of debt and rebuilding my finances step by step, I started noticing a pattern. People who stopped rebuilding their emergency fund over and over again weren't just better at it. They weren't saving more aggressively. What was different is they had clarity on what they were building towards. And that changes how everything is held together. That's what shifted things for me and why I think of emergency funds differently now. I never had a plan on what the money was for. I just stockpiled it and thought, there it is. It's waiting for me, ready to go. Here's what usually pulls people back into rebuilding mode. It's not one big emergency. It's timing gaps, bills that don't line up clearly with your paycheck, a month where expenses stack up faster than your income does. It's underestimated costs, things you know are coming, insurance renewals, car maintenance, medical bills, but never really seem accounted for. And it's convenience spending. I'll just deal with it later. That quietly fills the gaps when life gets busier or exhausting. None of these are necessarily feeling reckless. It actually feels responsible in the moment. But together, these are exactly what drains an emergency fund that wasn't built for it. So the money goes in, then comes out. And suddenly you're rebuilding again. The fund was never sized to the way your life actually operates. Up until this point, we've been clear on what an emergency fund is for. It's for income disruption, job loss, hours cut, gaps in pay. It's not for everyday spending, and it's not meant to be dipped into casually. Where people usually run into trouble isn't using their emergency fund. It's how the emergency fund is sized. Most emergency funds are built the moment income stops, but not necessarily the stretch that follows. Bills don't pause because you don't have a job. Costs you've already committed to still come and due. And cash flow has to now carry more weight for longer than expected. When someone's laid off, it takes you time to look for a job, to go and interview. And all this time, even if you got hired right away, there's a gap in time where you're still going to be short a paycheck for at least 2 to 3 weeks. All the while you have bills stacking up and expectations of when those are due. When an emergency fund isn't sized for that reality, it gets drained faster than planned. This isn't about picking a perfect number. It's about knowing that your emergency fund can actually do its job. So you stop building it over and over again. Let's look at this through lenses. How predictable is your income? Ask yourself this one question. If my income stopped tomorrow, could I realistically stabilize for 3 months without panic, debt, or scrambling? If the honest answer is yes, you may already be fully funded. You don't need to push any further than 3 months unless you want an extra buffer. If you answered no, let's move on to the next lens. How much flexibility do your expenses leave you? Even with stable income, fixed obligations changes how much margin you actually have. Ask yourself this one question. If my income paused, would my fixed expenses start creating stress before 3 months were up? You may need closer to 6 months if your fixed expenses are higher relative to your income. Housing, insurance, debt payments aren't easily adjusted. Missing a few paychecks would force hard trade-offs extremely quickly. If the answer is no, staying closer to 3 months may be reasonable. If the answer is yes, let's move on to the next lens. How long would recovery realistically take? This lens isn't about being overly cautious. It's about exposure. Ask yourself this one question. If income stopped, would getting back to stable income likely take longer than a few months? You may need 6 months or more if your role is specialized or industry specific, meaning there's not a lot of opportunity for your unique role or position. Replacing income would take time, not weeks. Your benefits, like insurance, are tied to your job. If you have a significant other, then you could be under your spouse's insurance and this would not apply to you. And lastly, a disruption would realistically stretch longer than expected. You may not need 6 months or more if your income is predictable and replaceable, meaning your job is in high demand and you could get a job offer by tomorrow. I know in this economy, a lot of people may seem like, oh, well, that's not going to happen or that's not realistic. I know people where they got laid off and the very next day they're being reached out to and all of a sudden they're going to start Monday. Your skills are transfer ready. Fixed expenses are already manageable. And lastly, a disruption would likely be short term. So let's pull this all together. This isn't about chasing a big number. It's about understanding why you keep rebuilding your emergency fund over and over again, and how to tell your emergency fund is actually doing its job. This isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. A real emergency fund depends on 3 things: how stable your income is, how much flexibility your fixed expenses leave you, and how long recovery would realistically take for you. When those pieces are all lined up, you stop guessing and you stop pushing just to push, and your savings start to feel easier instead of exhausting. I've lived both sides of this. I've had times where I had to mark on my calendar when I could pay something because I didn't have enough in my bank account to cover it. Where my friends are talking about going places and I'm worried about if I have enough to pay my ComEd bill. And I've also lived on the other side where I had an emergency fund and I had enough. And life just felt a lot easier. I could take my time looking for another job and I didn't have bills that were weighing me down in the back of my mind where I got to take the first offer. That's the worst experience you could have, where you're going into interviews feeling desperate. They can smell the desperation. So that's going to land you a terrible offer, a terrible experience, and you may even pick a terrible employer. An emergency fund doesn't make your life perfect, but it does change how your problems land. And that's what this stage is really about. If this video helped you in any way, please consider subscribing, as that really does help the channel grow. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.